Let's do it. Alrighty, here we go. My name is Marty Fox from WHITEFOX. Now, here's the deal. Jesse Jones, welcome to the With the Fox podcast. Now, coming in here, I saw you leaning up against the wall and you actually looked a little stressed. And I said, are you scared?
I think I'm always a little bit nervous when going into meetings. I think it's a good feeling. I think you always want to feel a little bit nervous whenever you're walking into something that is new, because it means that you are trying things that are different.
Well, it's the first time you've been on a podcast.
First time I've been on a podcast.
And
there was no intro sound just then either. I was waiting for like a, my name is Marty Fox from WHITEFOX.
No, there was none of that. But I think the nerves are there because I feel that you don't think that you're worthy of being on a podcast. And the reality is that the reason why I've got you on today is not because of the business that you've done, the GCI that everyone talks about and the commissions that you do, all the media, all that sort of crap. That's not why you're sitting here. You're really sitting here because I see a guy that has made changes within his role. You've made changes to your day. You've made changes to who you seek help from. And there's a lot of agents out there that hit periods in time like what I saw you hit last year. And a lot of people probably don't know, but we sat down towards the end of last year and I said, JJ, I love you as a friend. You're like an adopted brother. But if you don't make some of these changes immediately and you were put on a pretty intense, I think it was a 30 or a 60-day plan, it was you're leaving the business and you got to find another path in real estate elsewhere, because it's certainly not with WHITEFOX. And that was pretty heavy. And it was heavy because of the love and affection that I have and my family has and a lot of the team have for you. But there were things that you were doing that were working against you in terms of language and body language and the decisions that you were making that were literally holding you back because you weren't facing your limitations head on. And the reason why you're on the podcast is because I'd love to talk about them, because there's so many people that will be having those similar issues. And unless they drop the ego and they face them head on, they will never see the growth in themselves, which will then turn into their professional growth that you've seen in 2025. And I believe that what you achieved last year in terms of your real estate success, you've been able to achieve that in the first quarter of this year, which is one of the most remarkable turnarounds, not only in numbers, but in attitude and in energy that I've seen after nearly 18 years of running a business, which I need to commend you on. So well done.
Thank you. I think...
So before we jump into it,
can I talk
which we will, that was the intro that you were waiting for. Why don't we go back to the start? Tell us how you got into the game, our relationship, and towards the end of the podcast, we'll get into how you've turned it. So how did you fall into this industry?
I think like most, it's the unconventional way to get into real estate. It's such an interesting industry where there isn't a right or wrong path into it, and a lot of agents do, I feel, fall into it, as you did, as everyone else and most of the people in this business have. And I was really lost in school. We
went to the same school.
We went to the same, and for context, we always had a little bit of a familiarity, I guess, because we were actually competitors for maybe about 12 months in the flat space. So when I first got into real estate, I was probably 19, 20, and you would have been my age now at Wilson. So when I first got in, which was a bit of a random entry into real estate, we were, you, myself, and Jesse Rayburn were listing a lot of flats together. So, but I think going back to the start, I didn't know what to do after school. I wasn't great.
Did you finish school?
I finished school, so I finished year 12. I was a little bit lost, and I always felt that I'd be in some form of professional role. But
what were your siblings doing?
So my brother was in the army. he was in the military at 1AR in Townsville, and then my other brother was in biomedicine. So he worked for...
So they both went from school to uni?
Yeah, so they went from school to...
army
brother went to uni, and then my other brother went to the army.
Okay. And raised by...
Raised by a single mum. So Dad was out of the picture quite young. So he left... probably around when I was 7 or 8. So
do you remember that, or?
Yeah, I remember it. Look, he suffered a lot. He suffered from the drink, unfortunately, and it was a bit of a tough place growing up. To be honest, I think there was a lot of stuff that we missed, and there was Dad was obviously going through whatever he was going through, and alcoholism and working, and I guess trying to be a provider. But it wasn't a nice place to be growing up. So he left the picture quite young when I was around 7, and.
So did you just not see him, or?
Yeah, well, he moved into another state, so we never really saw each other, and I guess that's probably where a lot of my ego and a lot of that thick skin probably came from, because I've
always said that your exterior is all hard, and your first impressions are never really
a good reflection of who I actually am, and I think and it does stem back probably all the way back there, because when you see your dad walks out and you got a single mum who's raising 3 boys by herself, and we didn't have a lot growing up, and if you wanted something you had to really go and get it, but there wasn't any that family, it was quite hectic growing up. So and watching mum struggle and working and all those sorts of things. So I probably always had that a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, and that followed me through most of my sort of childhood, where going to school and all of that and all the activities that I do, that was just more so my escape. It was just me having fun, because I knew when I went home, it wasn't going to be fun. It was just home. It was what it was.
And most kids are meant to go home, and that's their sanctuary.
That's their sanctuary, yeah.
You didn't have that, and it does shape who you become. And some people turn that into a real negative. They play the victim.
Yeah.
One thing that you don't do, you actually never play the victim, but in response to it, you put out that you're so strong that it acts as a bit of an armor to not let people in.
Yeah.
And that is something that I know is what's turning you into a better professional and a better person just be around in general.
Better human being. And it's funny, it's really important to have the right people around you, because, for me personally, I've gone through my whole life with, sink or swim, and it's always been, chasing or trying to be, fitting in here or fitting in with a family, or, going into real estate or finishing high school, or just, whatever I was always doing.
Fight or flight constantly.
It was always just that. And I probably developed something that I didn't even see. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's funny that, when people first meet me, they used to say that, he's quite, it takes a long time to warm up. And that was probably what was preventing me a lot on the real estate side. But, so I mean, look, yeah, that was really the early stages in life. But so
then, did you end up repairing that with Dad, or what ended up happening?
He sort of left when I was 7, and I guess I had a bit of an ego, and I felt that at that point, he sort of left, and that was him kind of dead to me. So I never reached out. I probably spoke to him maybe 2 or 3 times on the phone, and maybe visited him one time after that, and then sort of the next time I saw him was probably doing a eulogy for him when I was probably 18, 19. So he passed away from bone cancer as well. So that was obviously a bit of an interesting one, because it's sort of like, when you're sort of saying goodbye to someone that is so important to your life, but you don't know who they were. I had mates that I'd probably known for longer. So, that was always a hard part, I think, for me. And then, I was a bit lost, and I went after school. After that, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and then pretty much a week after he passed away, my mum got diagnosed with kidney cancer. And
hold on, so you're 18.
Yeah.
You've just done the eulogy for your dad that you've not had a relationship with. You've just finished school.
Yeah.
It's meant to be the most exciting time of manhood. You've turned 18. You've gotten through 12 years of education.
Yeah.
You've got 2 brothers, one's in the army, one's at university.
Yep.
And you've just been told that your mum's now got cancer.
Yeah, so she had kidney cancer.
What happens to your brain at that point in time, and where do you go from there?
Yeah. Again, it's just a fight or flight. Like I just sort of dealt with it. I probably put a lot of it, and didn't address a lot of it, and sort of just went through it. And again, I was just really lost. And, I remember I remember leaving university, so I did a commerce degree because I always wanted to get into.
Wait,
to
you
property.
enrolled into the commerce
So I
degree?
enrolled into commerce after high school, and I was just like, well, I want to do something.
But you didn't finish it.
I didn't finish it. So I was at uni for 4 days.
You said
I got there Monday.
No,
and
you
I
said
got
that. You said I
Thursday.
did a commerce degree.
No, it was my commerce degree. I attended commerce, but I was
for
there
4 days.
For 4 days, so I did that Monday. But to be fair, like it's funny to laugh back now, but actually, I ended up leaving because my mum got diagnosed, and that was just I was like, look, I'm I was still living at home. I was still looking after her, and then that was, I just didn't think that would be something that I would attend to, and. Yeah. So I was in a bit of no man's land, and then I ended up about a week later. I bumped into someone that I knew whose I think father owned a agency or his uncle or something like that. And he said, "What have you been up to?" I said, "Mate, I got so much going on. Like I don't know what I'm doing. I just left uni." And he goes, "You'd be a great real estate agent." And I was like, I'd never even thought about real estate agents. So I had no idea what the property industry was or what the market was or anything along those lines. All I knew was agents wore suits, they sold houses, and they had Mercs. And I was like, I like suits. I got the gift of the gab, but I want a fucking Merc. So I'm going to get the Merc. So I thought I'd get a Merc. So, and that was it. And then I went home that day.
Who was that person that said that?
His name is Mickey Lee, and I think his dad or uncle owns Thompson. And I actually ended up going for a meeting with them, which they didn't actually give me a go. And basically from there, I went and got my agent's rep and those sorts of things. And I was just locked on real estate.
So where did you get a job?
So I ended up getting a job at Bella Real Estate, which is an old school independent firm that operated at Chapel Street in Windsor.
Which is literally less than a kilometre from where you went to school.
From where I went to school. And because I didn't grow up in the area, so I grew up in, like your Clayton, Dandenong, Oakley, that side of town. So, I always strive to become someone in a city. I loved coming to school. I loved crossing the overpass at Windsor and then going to Orange Cafe or Miletto's or all of that, which is the only thing that was in Windsor back then, in Buddha's Belly. And, I love that area and I always wanted to come through it. So when I saw something pop up in Windsor, I was like, well, that's what I want to do. So
got into the office?
And
were you like similar to me? Were you someone's sort of
cadet? No, so
or?
I actually, and probably this is where I guess my ego or, flight or fight was kind of beneficial, is that I just went all in. As soon as I knew that I wanted to be in real estate, I just said, okay, great. So I got the agent's rep.
So 19 years of age.
19 years of age. I got my agent's rep. I knocked on the door. I went in there, had an interview with them, and they said to us, this is a sales role. Do you want to have the weekend to think about it? And I said, I'm ready to go. Let's roll. And, they actually said, look, have the weekend and come back. And then on Monday I called them and said, let's go. So I ended up becoming a sales cadet, sales agent, but not in a team or a pod or an EA, just standalone sales executive, which was probably a lot for someone at that age. And I think at the time I probably
what value were you giving to people? Like what was that first year like?
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky because it was a business that had a lot of volume. So there was a big rent roll there and we were basically listing off that. So I had a lot of exposure to a lot of volume and a lot of deals back then. So even back then we were running maybe, 20 to 60 campaigns per year, which is a lot for someone that's 19. I remember having a box of keys and doing like 10, 12 opens on a Saturday. So I think I responded really well to the industry and people liked, I guess, the way they looked, the way that I spoke, and there wasn't much value in terms of results, but I had a lot of life experience, so I could connect with people quite easily, different people in different backgrounds. And because we were working at probably a lower price point, the people that I was connecting with on a personal level. So from 19, I was always a really good lister, and I still am a really good lister. And that really has come from a lot of the life experience and everything that I've come from as a kid and growing up, and going through hospitals and going to different states and going to different schools and those sorts of things.
I'm gonna touch on that. You said that you're a really good lister. You're a really good lister in a situation where you feel comfortable.
Correct.
You're not a good lister when you don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's where you've been held back. And that is where you've seen the growth in this year.
Yeah.
Because when you're not comfortable, that is when your guard goes up.
Yeah.
When you do feel like you're not part of the clique, or when you're not worthy, or when you feel like you shouldn't have the opportunity, you close up.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have that situational confidence, but what you've started to work on is just having that core confidence.
Yeah.
That takes years to develop.
It does.
And you're on the road to building that. But I think that's really important to touch on because you say that you're great at listing and you do have the mechanics and you do list amazingly well when you're comfortable. Where people explode in this business is when they've got the ability to have that in an environment that's unknown.
Yeah.
And that comes from that core confidence and not the situational. How long did you work at Bella?
So I was there from, I think, 19 till about 21.
So then you go from an independent that's probably got limited structure but a huge rent roll.
Correct.
And then you are part of McGrath's first ever office in Victoria.
And sort of the method behind the madness, and it's funny, like, I think there's a little story about where we met that we're probably skipping over there, which was...
We'll let you say.
Well, because the first time we actually met, so we met just before, I don't know if you remember this, but we met just before you started WHITEFOX. So it would have been 2016, I would say. And there was a property that I had in St Kilda, which was not an exciting property, but it was mine. And look, it was a 2-bedroom apartment, and I had tenants that were living in the property at the time. And I remember on the Saturday, and again, like, you had 12, 15 opens on the day, and this was the first one of the day, 9:30 to 10 open. And I got there and I knocked on the door, and I think they were like Uber drivers or delivery drivers or something, and they'd forgotten about the open. And I'd confirmed the night before, but they forgot. And I said, oh, like, I've got the open. They go, oh, look, we're sleeping, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, all right, cool. Look, what I'll do, I'll go downstairs. I'll take names and numbers. And anyone that wants to come back through, I'll get them through another time. Anyway, so I'm walking downstairs, and then as I'm walking down, you, Charlotte, and one of your mates starts walking in. And
Fletcher Payne,
I think. Yeah.
I was trying to help Fletch buy an apartment.
So and I think you just left Wilson at the time, and you were doing like side quests and like selling stuff like via being an advocate, and I don't know what you were doing, but you were just...
I was in gardening leave.
You were doing stuff, yeah. And you roll in, I was like, mate, look, nice to meet you, but I got some tenants up there sleeping. And you're like, yeah, it's fine, happens all the time, let's go. And I was like, yeah, I was like, I don't know if it's like comfortable. I was like, what? He goes, look, we'll go up. We're already here. I'm like, all right, sweet. So we end up going up and open the door, and I go, hey, mate, I just got a couple of guys here. Do you mind if they just come through and we'll get out of your hair? He goes, yeah, I'm fine, but my other 2 mates are sleeping. And I'm like, oh. So there was 3 people in the room asleep. He goes, all right, that's fine, go through. So we ended up walking through, and to your credit, you actually weren't bagging it out or anything, but it was, you know, just a quick walk through, super embarrassing. We ended up walking out, and when we were walking out, you said, you know, what's the situation? Like, what are you up to? I just said, oh, I'm working here. I said, look, I've seen what you've been doing. It looks really exciting. And then we walked out, and you said, yeah, look, I'm pretty excited about it all. Hopefully it all works out. And then, you know, a few months later, WHITEFOX started. So it was just a cool thing to watch. And I think it was probably that transition period where, you know, in 2016 in Melbourne real estate, it was very traditional. No matter what brand you were at, you were still wearing suits. You were still using paper and pen at opens. You still were, you know, there was no videos. There was really traditional spaces. Some people had market share, but the level of quality of marketing was all pretty much standardized. Everyone was using the same sort of companies. And I remember that shift when 2017 happened and WHITEFOX came on, and there was you know, there was a lot of talking, and things started to shift, and you could see from, you know, campaign perspective or marketing perspective, that was changing. The dress code of agents was changing. People were throwing out the suits. R&M Williams were coming in, T-shirts were coming in, sneakers were coming in. So that was, you know, whether that was a changing of all industries or whether that was the real estate itself, but that year things started to shift. And I remember sitting there, and I was at my office at Bella at the time, and I just thought, I'm overworking for half the result where I am. And I always wanted to get into the housing market. That's where I wanted to get into. But I just knew I needed to learn the mechanics of selling volume. And I knew that was the right place for me, because I thought, I'm too flamboyant. I'll roll into one of those big offices, they'll chew me up and spit me out. So I knew I had to go start low. And I went there, and then McGrath come onto the scene, and I loved working, obviously, Windsor Paran, and McGrath owned 3181 as a postcode, and they weren't wearing ties, which I loved. So I thought, well, if I head over there, rather than jumping into another agency and working on a patch, I'll go to McGrath and I'll take the whole suburb, and I'll work the entire patch for McGrath, and I'll try to build market share with that. So that's what I did. So I rolled over there, and And that's what I did. And all the agents in Windsor Paran were listing their properties in Paran. So I listed them in Windsor.
So how long were you in McGrath for?
I was there for about 3.5 years.
Okay.
And I worked through all of lockdown as a standalone agent. And I think, that was probably the hardest part of being a real estate agent, particularly at a smaller business and being a standalone agent with limited support. And it's a great company. And I loved McGrath. And I always thought that, I was really inspired by a lot of Sydney agents at the time when I was transitioning over, because I just felt like they were a lot more fast paced. Their marketing was cleaner. They were just doing things slightly different. And the only people that were doing that in Melbourne was really WHITEFOX at the time. So I went over there and I thought it'd be a good place to learn. And that's exactly what I did. I got a really good name for myself in Windsor, and I really doubled down on that niche rather than trying to compete with everyone in Paran. And I just started to get a bit of traction, but I felt quite lonely there. I was sort of on my own, and I was probably 10, 15 years junior to everyone else. And I lacked a lot of motivation. And then I think you reached out around probably lockdown. It would have been, we were still in lockdowns, and I think we went for maybe a walk or
I think
Beaconsfield Parade days.
I remember you came over to Beaconsfield Parade. And I said to Charlotte, I want you to meet this guy, Jesse Jones. And it's great because Charlotte's pretty on the money. And whenever she says yes and whenever she says no, she's correct.
Spot on.
And you're the one that she's always gotten wrong. And
Lana. And your mum.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Lana didn't want you. Charlotte didn't want you. My mum didn't want you.
Yours was on the fence.
But I did.
Yeah.
And when you came over and they all said no, I said, I'm sorry, but it's yes. I don't know whether or not that's because you were a CBC boy and I just really backed the underdog. But I just knew from the chats and the walks that there was something special in there. And I just genuinely liked you. I just thought that you were a funny little fucker. But I knew that you had a big heart. And I thought in the right environment with the right support, I didn't know all these things about you at the time. I didn't ask you all your, personal, shit. But as the years have gone on, obviously you get to see what you bring to the table. And I always say, I got you, Charlotte. You got one wrong. But the big thing is in how you evolve. And I remember when you came to WHITEFOX, you said, okay, I really want to try and transition out of selling apartments. I want to be able to sell, these single-fronted homes in Paran, Windsor, St Kilda, yada, yada, yada. And really just up the price point because you were drowning in the volume of apartments. And I said, mate, this is when you can do it, but it's not going to be easy. And it certainly isn't easy. Why isn't it easy to go from apartments into houses?
It's such a good question. I think, there's a few things. I think there's also different markets within markets, and I think there's different suburbs that operate at different levels as well. Because I think, this conversation we're having around transitioning from apartments to houses is probably around a certain postcode, which I'd say is Port Phillip and Stonington and Bayside. That is a hard transition to make within those markets, because I think they're
highly competitive.
They're highly competitive. There's long standing relationships. There's established wealth, and there's people that have sold for families for 20, 30 years.
So in order to penetrate those relationships, has it just been a high level of follow-up and a relationship that you've been able to build quicker?
Yep.
Or is it brand? What is it that helps you get in?
It's everything. And it can't be one thing, because being a nice guy won't get you a listing. Having a lot of energy won't get you a listing. Having, a sale down the street still doesn't guarantee you a listing. There's so many things that a vendor looks at, particularly in these areas, to trust someone to represent their asset in blue chip Melbourne. And it's a combination of having the results, knowing the area, knowing the relationships as well, because it's very much a relationship market, in the sense that people also want to back the people that they're going to buy the next property from. So if they go with another agent, they jeopardize that relationship on the next one. So it's really looking at, the market overall. So for me, what I'm focused on is I'm really focused on the buyer on the way in and playing a really long game, because I know if I service the buyer on the way in and I give them really good advice and I'm involved from a transactional level, not necessarily being remunerated for it, but helping them actually purchase it and giving them the information and the price of what they want to pay to get a good buy, I know that service will then help me listen on the other end.
Well,
and also building a great relationship.
Because what I'm seeing, you're 3 years in now with WhiteFox, yeah?
4.
4 years.
Yeah.
You're starting to see the people that you helped 3 and 4 years ago coming back now.
Yeah.
And you said earlier that you were able to connect with these people that you were working with in the apartment space.
Yep.
And you were.
Yeah.
Whereas I know that you felt a disconnect in the housing market because you weren't buying and selling and flipping like what I was.
Yeah.
And that was hurting your confidence in meetings. But you found a way and an avenue through the buyer.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to consider because not everyone has to be flipping and selling and renovating constantly to feel a connection with these homeowners.
Correct.
It is genuinely about being there when you're not being paid because you'll build that genuine relationship and you'll get the resale down the line. So you've played that long game and you're an impatient person by nature.
100%.
That would have been, I think that's culminated in the battle that you've had.
Yeah.
Because I am going to go to last year where you were very huffy and puffy. You had your mum who was really sick, touch and go.
Yeah.
You also had a girlfriend that left. That was a saga in itself. And you weren't seeing the rewards through work. So you had Mrs. Go, shitty situation, mum incredibly unwell, shitty situation, and you're getting rejected in listings totally. Like, and I also, was last year...
That was probably, I reckon, 2023 would have been the hardest year of my life because I also at the start of the year, the other decision that I made, because I'd come into WhiteFox and I was still pretty consistent in that 21, 22 period. Like I wasn't breaking records, but I was a consistent agent. It wasn't that I was doing nothing on the month.
But you also put on an EA.
Put on an EA.
Which was in hindsight, the wrong thing to do.
The wrong thing to do too early. But the thing is, I've just been trying different things along the way. Like it was just, from a fashion point of view, I was rolling in t-shirts. I started to wear sneakers. I tried to be a little bit different to everyone that I was dealing with. I was just seeing if that would work. I tried to, lower my, heighten up my price point. So I said, look, I'm not going to take anything under 2 mil. I did that for a little while. And then very quickly I got pretty humbled and I started taking things on, for 700 or 800. So, I was just trying a lot of things.
You changed your fashion without pulling off the confidence in it.
Yeah.
You changed the price point by turning your nose up at the listings that literally got you to where you were.
Yeah.
And you put on an EA thinking that would help you increase your volume, which it just added to your stress levels.
Yeah, correct.
3 things professionally went wrong, and then 3 things privately went wrong.
Yeah.
And last year, that's what culminated in a lot of people pulling me aside and saying, hey, mate, JJ. I'd see you more personally.
Yeah.
And I was like, JJ's fine.
Yeah.
And then when I started to listen and really analyse it, I went, okay, this is now a point where you would be given advice and it was like hitting a cricket bat, right? You were unpenetrable. And that's when I reached out to somebody that helped me when I got sick, when I went to Gwingana. And that was this beautiful human who I still speak to maybe once every 6 to 8 weeks. And she's such an incredible psychologist, but she understands business.
Yeah.
And also being similar ethnicity to you, I knew that you guys would hit it off. And I said, JJ, if you don't speak to this lady, because you had never done therapy in your life.
Never.
You'd never seen anyone. And I thought, fuck, for somebody that has gone through so much trauma, how have you not ever been able to speak about it and try and get yourself on track? Because for you, it was all about regulation of emotion. That was eating into your professional performance. I said, JJ, I'll cover the first 6 sessions. And after that, if you continue, you continue. But these first 6 will put you in good stead. What did you learn in airing those issues with a professional that knows nothing about real estate, but knows a lot about the brain?
I think it's, and she always refers to it as like, it's like a detox. And it's like, you go to the gym, you train, your muscles get bigger, you go for a run, you get, you have a good feeling about yourself. And I think a lot of people will actually not, when it comes to the brain, it being a muscle, a lot of people just don't do anything with it. for years, you know, and I was probably the same in the sense that I always, you know, like you said, fight or flight. I never really wanted to address anything because there's a little bit of an ego or a chip on my shoulder to not actually think that there's any problem. And I think for a lot of it, I just never addressed anything, and I never felt like it was a problem on my day to day because I buried it so deep that it wasn't an issue. But I think once you're running, trying to, you know, survive or build a career or do whatever you're trying to do, and it's all those little things that are, you know, deep down that actually start to come out. And I think, you know, real estate particularly is an energy game, and it's a massive mirror, and whatever you give out to the world or to the people that you're looking at is what you receive back, and that's just a fact. It is what it is. And I think probably what I learned the most from her was actually just being able to, you know, she was someone that I'd give my issues to, but she was the one that would just, you know, take out those three main points and actually make me reflect on exactly what happened, and really not just be there as a sounding board and look at the clock. She was actually she was almost not arguing, but debating with me and letting me get it out in a way that she thought would work for me. And I think by the like third or fourth session, I actually felt so light. And that's probably the only way I can explain it. Whereas, you know, I think back to how like tense and aggressive I probably got to just from pure frustration and, you know, things that were buried that I never really addressed. She just got it out of me. And then, you know, by the time the catch-ups that we have now, we're just having a laugh. And it's not that I'm not, not affected by those things that have happened to me. I'm laughing about it. No, but I guess I just have a different outlook on life, and there's things that are happening to you, and everyone's going through shit. So it's not like there's anything for, you know, myself or yourself that you're going through that you're not addressing. But, you know, if you can look at the world and go, well, I can't control what's happening to anyone. I can't control what's happening to my mum. I can't control, you know, a situation that someone's in that I'm giving advice that they're not listening to. You actually can't. And what I probably did was I gave people advice from, you know, wearing my heart on my sleeve and helping people. And I get frustrated that I couldn't help them. And as well as it was my issues, I was taking on their burdens, which was actually making me a more angry and aggressive person, really. That's really what it was. So I think it's just having that that sounding board to now, you know, I look at life and, yeah, mum's going through it, but I'm here for mum. I can't change what's happening for her. All I can do is be here for her. And the only way I can be here for her is being completely present with who I am. So that's really more my philosophy now. It's just like, well, you know, if I can't help someone, then that's fine. I'll move on to the next. But there's no ego or there's no stress or there's no drama with that particular person. I'm not carrying their burden for, you know, if I can't help them. And I think that's probably more my outlook, and that's what she's probably helped me to do the most.
And I think that's why I really wanted you on this podcast, because it's just such an amazing, you know, turnaround for me to see a colleague, but a genuine, you know, extension of my family, to see someone that goes through a horrible breakup. You know, they're, you know, going through the likelihood of, you know, being orphaned at a time when you haven't had your children, you haven't had your wedding, you haven't had these things that I know that you are excited to share with your mum and your family. And also see the turn professionally. It's a combination of unlocking and debunking these traits that you have. You haven't changed as a person.
I don't think I've changed.
You've gotten rid of the things that were holding you back as a person. And how important is it having the right life partner next to you? Because you do have a new girlfriend who is my EA, Taylor Brew. And that was quite funny. I was like, can you guys just fucking get together already? And Charlotte and I were always messaging saying, come on, guys, like fucking do something here. It was never happening.
It's funny. You know, it's funny. It's funny how, that's funny because Paris, France is in front of us. So it's funny because what actually happened is, you know, and we've always had really weird connections in the sense that, like, we never plan to catch up ever.
And when we do, it doesn't happen.
And we're always together somehow. So there's always, like, I don't know what it is. It's a bit weird. But anyway, but I remember...
Well, my dad's like your dad.
Well, yeah, I know. We got dinner on Friday. But
yeah, I know. That's going to be unreal.
We were at Hawksburn, and it was February in 2023. And it was actually a really random Friday. You never come into the office, but you, for some reason, were in the hallway at the office. And I just got like one of those little green putters, you know, that returns the golf ball. And you're sitting in the hallway and you're just like, you're putting away on a golf ball, which is so odd for you. But I remember I got off the phone with my auntie And she looked at, she called me and she goes, look, Jess, it's not good. And she just come from the doctors and she told, she goes, oh, look, mum's not good. And I remember I got off the phone and I was like, I was pretty emotional. And you looked at me and looked at me straight away. You're like, what's happened? And I told you. And then, so that was, that was an interesting sort of, moment. And then what ended up happening is, we ended up catching up 6 weeks and, obviously forever grateful for, you actually, put mum on a trip to Paris for us. And, that was a really fun moment. But
that was for Mother's Day.
For Mother's Day.
Well, what actually happened is when you had that phone call from your auntie, I think I called you over 2 or 3 days later.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, if your mum passes, what's your biggest regret? And you said, my biggest regret is that I never got to take her to Paris.
Yeah.
And then it was Mother's Day. And then it was Mother's Day like 3 days later. And I said to Charlotte, hey, why don't we send Jesse and his mum and let's send them to Paris for Mother's Day. And you went, and just by fluke, and you had a girlfriend at the time.
Yeah.
Taylor Brew happened to be there as well.
So I get there on my birthday, and it's quite funny. Like, I got there on my birthday, and we had such an amazing time, an amazing trip. And my mum, like, she loved, her favourite movie is Breakfast at Tiffany's. So we took her to Tiffany's in Paris, and it was unreal. And my best friend, he just got engaged to Mel, when their wedding's in Cyprus, going there this year, and they their flight got delayed, so France cancelled their flight, and they couldn't make my birthday, which I was annoyed because we planned the trip around catching up in Paris and all of that. So I was sitting there with my brother, and I'm just scrolling on Insta, and and Taylor's got a photo of the Eiffel Tower, and I sent her a message. I'm like, "What is this, a throwback?" Or are you
and Taylor Brew at the time was
here?
Lana Samuels' SC sales coordinator,
and we'd never ever really caught up at all. And then we ended up catching up in I just said, "Well, it's my birthday. Like, do you want to have like an Aperol or something?" And then we ended up catching up when we were in France for my birthday for like.
And what's
9
funny,
hours.
And what's
Aperols.
funny, everyone was like, "Oh, Jesse and Taylor are together, blah 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 blah."
Yeah.
But nothing happened. You were just mates.
Yeah, like.
And then you came back, and then you and your girlfriend broke up.
Yeah.
You went into a deep dark place, and then it would have been like 6 to 9 months later. We were like, "Why are you and Taylor not hanging out more?" And you both were holding firm. You both were like, "No, we're not going there. We're not going there. We're not going there." So I just thought, you know what, fuck this shit, because I knew that there was a genuine friendship.
Yeah.
And I think every good relationship starts with friendship. If you can build a life with a mate that you then happen to like to be around as much as possible, cue in the rack. Like, you've just clocked life. So I actually tricked you, and I made out like I had set up a blind date because you guys were just refusing to get together. So I walked into the office, and at the top of my lungs, I was like, "JJ." And you go, "Yeah." I was like, "Mate, Thursday, 7 o'clock, be at my house. I've set you up on a blind date. She's a lot older. She's nearly 40. She drives a Porsche. She's got her own company."
Yeah.
And you're like, yes. Little did you know it was all made up.
Yeah.
But I said it so loud so that Taylor could hear it. I was hoping to say this at your wedding one day. And anyway, I thought that if I threw that cat amongst the pigeons between the Monday and the Thursday when your date should have been, something would happen. And lo and behold, between Monday and Thursday,
There you go.
you sealed the deal. And you and Taylor have been great ever since.
Hilarious. But it's just funny. It's just like silver lining. I think that's just life, and I think that's the cool thing about it. Like, you just sometimes you don't even you're what you think is going to happen. And I probably planned out the next 3 or 4 years of my life thinking about what I was going to do and trips and things like that. And it's funny how sometimes it's just next to you, or whatever you need to do is right in front of you, or the next person you need to meet is right there, or your network you've already got. Like, you just sometimes need perspective, and you need the right people around you, because you've got the wrong people around you. You can do all the right things, but you'll be limited. But if you've got the right people that are behind you and lift you, you can do whatever you want.
Well, mate, all I've got to say is, you didn't think that you were worthy of coming onto a podcast. You've had moments in your life where you haven't felt worthy of getting the listing. You haven't felt worthy because you didn't get that grammar education, every other limiting belief that you've had in your brain. I can tell you as a friend that you are worthy. you are a fucking great human being, and I love seeing you soar, and I think you'll continue to do well as long as you keep uncovering what it is that Jesse Jones is all about, because what I know is that he's got a great heart, he's a hard worker, and I'm very, very excited for people to listen to this and to take something away, because you are a fucking champion.
Thanks, bro.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks.